Hello and welcome to another video by Financial Ernie. On today's video, we're going to take a look at MicroStrategy. They just put out an 8K filing disclosing some spot Bitcoin they purchased. They utilized some of their at-the-market offering. We'll get into the details of exactly how many shares were utilized. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, jumping into the 8K, this was put out on January 21st. It is for MicroStrategy Incorporated. Digging into the details here, we're going to start with this ATM update. As previously disclosed on October 30th, 2024, MicroStrategy Incorporated entered into a sales agreement with, and there is a ton of companies here. If you want to pause it and read through them all, you definitely can, or pull up the SEC filing. I will have that in the description. But it basically says the company may issue and sell shares of its Class A common stock, having an aggregate offering price of up to 21 billion from time to time through sales agents. And then it mentions on January 21st, 2025, the company announced that during the period between January 13th, 2025 and January 20th, 2025, the company sold an aggregate of 3,012,072 shares under this sales agreement for an aggregate net proceed to the company of approximately 1.1 billion. As of January 20th, 2025, approximately 5.42 billion of shares remained available for issuance and sale pursuant to this sales agreement. So taking a look at what exactly did they purchase, so they mentioned, the aggregate of 1.1 billion, but you have to recall that there are some specific transaction fees and things of that nature, and we don't know exactly what the prices were for that Bitcoin yet, but they do disclose this under this Bitcoin holdings update. So on January 21st, 2025, the company announced that during this period, they had acquired approximately 11,000 Bitcoins for approximately 1.1 billion in cash. And it was acquired at an average price of approximately $101,191 per Bitcoin. And that is inclusive of all the fees and expenses. So these Bitcoin purchases were made using the proceeds and issuance of this specific sales agreement. So this ATM that we just discussed. And then just looking at this last little section here about the update, as of January 20th, 2025, the company, together with its subsidiaries, held an aggregate of approximately 461,000 Bitcoins, which were acquired at an aggregate purchase price of approximately 29.3 billion for an average purchase price of approximately $63,610 per Bitcoin. So, and this is inclusive again of fees and other expenses. So, looking at that, considering where Bitcoin price is right here, there is a pretty good margin for MicroStrategies compared to their average cost of Bitcoin. And as of this recording, Bitcoin has been jumping up and down. It's been staying a little bit above that $101,000 mark. So, this does look like a lucrative purchase at this time. And then, one other section I want to talk about in this 8K filing. Some people saw this and got kind of excited. I want to kind of explain a little bit about it. Actually, I won't explain it. I'm going to go ahead and let this AK filing explain it. So looking down in item 7.01, this is the Bitcoin yield KPI. So this is a percent that you may see MicroStrategy utilizing from time to time. It says here that from January 1st to January 20th, the company's Bitcoin yield was 1.69%. Now you have to be cautious about that, and they talk about this throughout the rest of this filing. This is not a specific metric as far as a yield on additional dollars being added. Like they're not lending out this Bitcoin in order to be able to generate this 1.69% yield. So let's take a look a little bit about what exactly this KPI is used for. Also, they do a great job of breaking down the amount of shares at the end of 2024, looking forward to January 20th of 2025. So what all changed as far as shares outstanding? What types of shares were they? Were they Class A, Class B, preferred, and other options such as that? So let's take a little bit of look closer at that. But let's talk about this Bitcoin yield. So they mention this as a key performance indicator. That's a KPI that represents the percentage change period to period of the ratio between the company's Bitcoin holdings and its assumed diluted shares outstanding. So it's just a specific ratio, taking a look at those overall shares compared to the company's Bitcoin holdings. So it's an okay metric for the company to utilize, but I think it's important as investors that you really understand what the value is in this KPI. So taking a look a little bit more, it says here that the company uses Bitcoin yield as a KPI to help assess the performance of its strategy of acquiring Bitcoin in a manner the company believes is accretive to shareholders. So although these shares are being diluted, what the company is saying is that price of Bitcoin or that value of Bitcoin is increasing, and it's increasing at an amount that would kind of outdo the dilutive impact. So, taking a look at the Bitcoin holdings, you can see at the end of the year, they were at 447,470 Bitcoin. And as of January 20th, they're up to 461,000. How did they get that? They show the amount of shares that were utilized in order to acquire that Bitcoin. So looking at basic shares outstanding at the bottom, and this is in thousands, so I'll go ahead and convert that over. At the end of the year, they were sitting at 245,778,000. And as of January 20th, they were at 249,572,000. So if you do that math, it's a little bit shy of 4 million shares. They mentioned up at the top that they were using about 3 million or so. So there were some additional shares that were either utilized in some kind of employee compensation or in some other way outside of this specific ATM transaction. So I just want to kind of disclose that information with you all. And then they do a good job of showing some of their additional convertible notes that they have. You can see some of these different potential exercise prices that they have these convertible shares coming in at. And you can see that for the most part, none of these really moved at all. The only one that did is right past those convertible shares. You can actually see the options outstanding. You can see there were some options that were utilized here during this time period. So potentially that's where some of those additional outstanding shares played a factor. You know, when those options were exercised, potentially they were converted over to shares instead of at a value or at a dollar amount, I should say. And then looking at that RSU, PSU, this unvested amount, it had a slight change as well. Remember, these are in the thousands. So this is about 10,000 of this RSU unvested amount change. So they're just looking at the overall assumed diluted shares outstanding. That would be taking all of these convertible notes if they were to be exercised, you know, at the current pricing, as well as these options, the RSUs, and the current common stock A and B. They would have a delta. If you look at that, it goes from 281,735,000 to 285,425,000. So again, just utilizing the change in share count and then looking at the change in the Bitcoin value, that's where the company gets this 1.69% yield that they talk about. And one last thing before we close it out, they can talk a little bit more about the important information behind the Bitcoin yield. And I think it's very important to kind of make sure to point out that the company, I'm looking at this second paragraph here, says the company uses Bitcoin yield as a KPI to help assess the performance of its strategy of acquiring Bitcoin in a manner the company believes is accretive to shareholders. Company believes this KPI can be used to supplement an investor's understanding of his decision to fund the purchase of Bitcoin by issuing additional shares of common stock or instruments convertible to common stock. So again, it's just a way to understand, you know, is the company's decisions, are they, you know, providing a positive yield when it comes to the dilution compared to the price of Bitcoin, or is it a negative yield? At this point in time, because of the price of Bitcoin or the value of Bitcoin increasing, you're getting a positive yield when looking at the total amount of dilution for shareholders. So again, this is showing an accretive value for shareholders. But then again, I want to show this third paragraph. This is, in my opinion, the most important part when you're looking at this metric. It says that this KPI is not and should not be understood as an operating performance measure or a financial or liquidity measure. So again, this is merely just a metric to compare the Bitcoin value compared to those diluted shares. All right, jumping into the last page of this specific filing, I want to note this section here, looking at paragraph 2 on page 4 here, it says in calculating this KPI, the company does not take into account the source of capital used for the acquisition of its Bitcoin. The company notes in particular it has acquired Bitcoin using proceeds from the offering of its 6.125% senior secured note that is due in 2028. So the company has already redeemed this note. So they already have specific capital on hand due to this senior secured note. So that's what they are utilizing for this capital. And a couple other things worth noting on this page here. I'm going to read this section here. I'm going to kind of highlight the first word here. So looking at this conversely, if any of the company's convertible senior notes mature or are redeemed without being converted into common stock, the company may be required to sell shares in quantities greater than the shares such notes are convertible into or generate cash proceeds from the sale of Bitcoin, either of which would have the effect of decreasing the Bitcoin yield due to changes in the company's Bitcoin holdings and shares in ways that were not contemplated by the assumptions in calculating the Bitcoin yield. So, putting that into layman's terms, if for some reason one of these senior secured note holders decide they want cash instead of shares in MicroStrategy, MicroStrategy will then have to dilute additional shares, maybe through an at the market offering, in order to cover that price differential. Or they're going to have to sell some of their Bitcoin holdings in order to be able to make do or basically square up that senior convertible note. And again, that would definitely impact the Bitcoin yield, as that's not the way that these calculations are done. They're calculating them with the assumption that all of these convertible notes will be converted over into these shares. All right, and let's take a look at MicroStrategy's share price. Looking back on the 13th of January through the 21st of January, I know they mentioned that it was up to January 20th. Of course, the market was not open that day. Just taking a look, you can actually see a rather large share increase or share price increase during that time period. I contribute that to buying volume. So, because these shares were being exercised at the market, depending on the exact value at which these shares are being exercised, whether or not it's at a discount or it's specifically at the asking price of the stock itself, that's going to have an impact. So I think it's rather interesting to look at how the at the market offering can actually provide a price increase for MicroStrategy. Not saying that that's the reason behind it. That's just my opinion, pure speculation. However, I do find it interesting that during that ATM period, you did see a rather large price jump for MicroStrategy. Now, of course, if the companies that did purchase these shares at that market offering price decide at some point in time in the near future they want to sell those shares instead of holding long, you may see a rather large sell volume, considering the number of shares that were utilized during this ATM period. All right, and that wraps it up for me, folks. I hope you enjoyed this quick little update on MicroStrategy and the 8K filing covering their spot Bitcoin purchasing, as well as a little bit of that ATM offering. We understand the period at which they exercise those shares in order to generate that additional capital. And then they talked about utilizing some of the capital from that senior secured convertible note. And we also discussed a little bit about how that Bitcoin yield percent is actually calculated. Again, that's just a KPI the company is using in order to um, provide the shareholders with a little bit of information looking at the value at which Bitcoin is increasing compared to the number of shares that are being utilized in order to gain those additional Bitcoin. So again, if you like this update, please consider giving the video a like. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on MicroStrategy. Do you agree with their spot Bitcoin purchasing? What's your thoughts about the dilution? Do you think that it's justified with the current price action with Bitcoin? And with all that said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And I'll see you on the next one.